My name is Becca, and I grew up in the Mitchell family. This name was always more than just a surname to me. It symbolized order, rules, and, above all, an unshakable hierarchy. From a young age, I understood that our home had its own set of values, and I was not at the top of that structure. At the very top of our family's throne room sat Emma, my older sister. My princess, as my mom called her. And somewhere below, in this hierarchy, was me. I was like a shadow, always there, but almost invisible, constant yet insignificant. Like the family dog, fed and petted, but whose feelings were never considered. Every morning began the same way. Mom woke up earlier than anyone else, and that was her time. She made breakfast for Emma, carefully setting the table for her princess. 2 eggs sunny side up, toast cut diagonally, just the way Emma liked it. Mom always said, "This way, you get a portion of happiness for the whole day, dear." And it felt like a ritual I wasn't a part of. When Emma sat down at the table, her expression was content, and a smile played on her lips. Mom took care of every one of her wishes, as if she were a queen, and I was merely her loyal subject. Meanwhile, I sat at the table in the shadows, handed a box of cereal, and all I could do was watch as all the attention went to my sister. The differences between us were obvious and appeared everywhere. For example, when I needed braces, Dad would start complaining about the cost of the procedure. He'd sit at the table with the newspaper, making a face, and say, "It's expensive, but what can you do?" That went on for 2 months. But when it came to Emma, the situation changed dramatically. 2 years later, she also needed braces, and suddenly money was no object. I remember how they calmly discussed the best model for her teeth, as if it were a matter of choosing a new phone, not a necessity to pay a large sum for something related to my appearance and health. And despite my constant requests and attempts to convince them that my teeth also needed fixing, all I got were distracted nods from Dad, who was more interested in the latest news and his new work responsibilities. I can't forget how she always got what she wanted. Emma knew how to make everything revolve around her, like a solar system with her radiant figure at the center. Meanwhile, I played the role of a satellite, occasionally getting attention when it was needed. For example, one of our family celebrations, Emma's birthday, turned into a full-blown spectacle. We rented a trampoline, hired a team of entertainers, and threw a huge party with music, dancing, and a multi-layered cake. It was a real celebration for everyone, where she was the star. When my birthday came around, everything looked completely different. It was simple. Mom bought a cake from the supermarket, I picked my friends, and we had something like a picnic in the backyard, running around, talking, and playing old games. But even in those moments when I tried to create a festive atmosphere, I always felt like it wasn't quite what I would have wanted. I didn't understand why I couldn't be on the same level as Emma, why I couldn't be the one around whom everything revolved in celebration and joy. In hindsight, I often asked myself why I had so few opportunities to stand out. Why couldn't my dreams, wishes, and even the simplest needs be fulfilled with the same enthusiasm as Emma's? Maybe Mom and Dad just didn't understand that I also needed their attention, that I wasn't just a shadow of my sister. Sometimes, it seemed like they didn't even notice, consumed by their concerns for their older daughter, who had always been the more important one. I begged them for one thing: "Mom, Dad, please pay attention to me the way you do to her." But my words seemed to get lost in the noise of the house, in the conversations about what needed to be bought, where to find money, and how to make Emma even happier. And perhaps the most painful realization for me was understanding that Emma never asked for what I needed. She never asked anyone to give her their best day, never asked for someone to protect or encourage her. She just existed, and that was enough for everyone to try to please her. As for me, I was always searching for my place in this house, among these people. I learned to keep my visits short, as though time had become something fragile, shards I feared would cut me. My expectations also became shorter, smaller, almost imperceptible. I stopped hoping that anything would change, that anyone would suddenly recognize my worth. As soon as finals ended each semester, would go back to my dorm, where at least my achievements belonged only to me. There, no one compared them to the mediocre results my younger sister displayed. There, I could be myself, even in this small corner of the world. I could leave behind my shadow in the family home, where I was constantly under scrutiny and evaluation. My first year at university was a true liberation. Finally, I could be anonymous, unmarked by anyone, just Becca, and it was comfortable. I was building my life step by step, not looking back. But as often happens, change, sometimes the most unexpected, comes when you least expect it. One day, while sitting in my room studying lectures for an exam, I received a message on Facebook. A simple text, without much emotion, but there was something about it that made my heart beat faster. "Hey, do you remember me? Mike Harrison from Kennedy High. I was a senior when you were a freshman." Of course, I remembered him. He was that sweet guy from the debate team, who never seemed to notice me. He was always in the spotlight, with his easy smile and ability to talk to anyone. And I was in the shadows, as usual. It's not that I longed for that attention. I didn't need it back then. But perhaps, deep down, I still dreamed that someone, just one person, would notice me, hear that I existed too. And now, he was back, in some new context. We started texting, at first cautiously, then more and more often, without much restraint. He shared stories from his work, talking about his successes as an engineer in our hometown, and I shared memories from university life, adult experiences, and a hidden, yet very palpable, sense of loneliness. Our conversations became something more than just an exchange of thoughts. They became a window into another world, where I could be interesting, wanted, and needed. A couple of months later, we agreed to meet. It was my first week back home after returning to the city. I was eagerly looking forward to this meeting, despite my usual reserve. We met for coffee at a small cafe on the corner. He was just like before, wearing the same kind smile, with the same confident look in his eyes. But now, when I looked at him, I saw something more, something that made my heart race. We spoke like old acquaintances, laughing, reminiscing about school, but at the same time, feeling that something new already existed between us, something unspoken, yet urgently real. The coffee turned into dinner, and dinner into a date. We sat at the same cafe, but time no longer mattered. His presence seemed inevitable, his words enveloped me, and I felt how this new world opening before me became more and more real. Mike was no longer the boy I had gone to school with. Now he was the person who saw me, not the shadow of my sister or the girl hiding behind someone else's victories. He looked at me as someone worth getting to know. And in his eyes, I saw something deeper than mere interest. We began spending more time together, strolling through the city streets, discussing everything and nothing. He told me about his job, I shared my experiences from university, but over time, our conversations became more personal. He became increasingly interested in my life, and in turn, I opened up to him about my worries and anxieties. When he kissed me, I couldn't help but think that my feelings had changed. That simple kiss seemed to confirm that, for someone, I now meant more than just a part of the familiar world. Mike wasn't my first, but he was the first to make me feel that I could be important, that I wasn't just a shadow, but that I existed on my own, with my own desires and dreams. We laughed, joked, argued, but with each passing day, there was more between us that I could call closeness. And after a few months, I began to realize that this was the turning point in my life that I had been searching for, perhaps without even knowing it. But still, despite everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that, somewhere deep down, I was still that little girl who always felt like she was in the background. I sat in my lawyer's office after signing the final documents. The divorce was final, but the remnants of pain had not disappeared. Lucas was too young to understand what was happening, why Dad no longer came home, why his world had suddenly changed. He was only 2, and his eyes hadn't yet learned to see the hidden meanings in the gestures and words of adults. I could only guess how hard it was for him, but he never complained. He was too young to ask questions, but I often caught his gaze, full of confusion and sadness, as he searched for his father in the empty corners of our house. After the divorce, Mike's family became my lifeline, the one I could rely on, despite everything that had happened with their son. Tom and Sarah, his parents, remained devoted grandparents to Lucas, despite their age and all the hardships they had endured. Jenny, his younger sister, was the best relative I could have asked for. She never let me forget that there were people capable of giving real warmth, despite the surrounding cold. Mike's home became a quiet refuge for us. Even when we visited them, little Lucas always knew that a toy corner awaited him, arranged with such care that it felt like a whole world had been created just for him. Tom, despite his years, always eagerly got down on the floor to play with him, and Jenny, with her boundless energy, always found something new for us to play or craft. Their home was full of warmth and care. It was a real home. My parents' family, on the other hand, was a completely different story. I tried to visit them from time to time, hoping that they would want to build a relationship with their only grandson. But, as always, it was painful to witness their indifference. Mom, looking up from her magazine, simply said, "Becca, don't let him touch that vase," and immediately went back to reading. Not a word of concern, not the slightest interest in what was happening with their grandson. I kept hoping that one day something would change, that they would at least make an effort and pay attention to Lucas, but none of my visits brought any comfort. It was like repeatedly crashing into a wall that didn't crumble, but only grew stronger. But Lucas wasn't to blame for this. He was an infant, with honest, open eyes that asked questions to which no one had answers. When he came to visit them, he immediately headed for the toy corner, where a small plastic kitchen and colorful cars stood. But despite all these little joys, his gaze was always wary, as if he was looking for something more that he couldn't find in their house. It took a long time before I began to understand that this wasn't just a break with my husband, not just a divorce that shattered my life. It was a break with what I had once considered family, with what I had always thought mattered. Left on my own, I started seeking salvation in what remained. In Mike's family, I felt that I could be real, that I didn't have to pretend, I didn't have to try to be someone else to be accepted. They didn't ask questions, they just stood by me, and that gave me a sense of security. Every time we visited them, I noticed how Lucas became more and more calm, more confident in himself, playing with his grandfather on the carpet or sitting with Jenny at the table, where they would draw and glue things together. I almost forgot that once, in another house, I sat at a table where everything was restrained, sterile, and where I always felt out of place. Here, at Mike's, I was part of something bigger. I could simply be a person, not someone's daughter or wife. And perhaps, Lucas, seeing all this, also felt some sort of peace, because here he saw a real family, not by blood, but by spirit. But none of this could change what was in my own home. My parents remained as cold as ever, absorbed in their own little worlds where there was no room for others. Even when I tried to approach them and talk about something important, it always ended in disappointment. "Becca, don't touch that vase, it's expensive." This phrase became a symbol of how things were arranged in their house. I could no longer afford to hide my pain behind walls of disappointment. From time to time, I still tried to build bridges. Lucas ran from room to room, excited and joyful, as if the whole world had become his new playground. He now had his own place for toys, his little kingdom, and he eagerly explored every corner, every shelf. He examined his new toys carefully, without showing any sign of fatigue, as if each new thing opened up a whole universe for him. I sat nearby, watching him with a sense of calm. This was the moment when all the difficulties, the worries, and the disappointments became almost insignificant. All I wanted was for Lucas to be happy, for him to know that now he had a place to always return to, where he would be waited for. I was absorbed in my thoughts when he grabbed my phone and started studying the calculator that was open on the screen. He didn't know how to use it, but still amusingly pressed the buttons, trying to figure out how this magical device worked. I continued to type in numbers, gathering documents for the mortgage, but my gaze couldn't leave Lucas. In those moments, I felt how much my life had changed, how much had been done and experienced to bring us here, to this moment of peace and warmth. One more time, should we accept this? I asked softly, as I was tucking Lucas into bed in our old apartment. He was almost falling asleep when he suddenly turned to me with a question that still echoes in my heart. Mom, are we really going to have a new house? With my own room? And your own room? And a special art corner, and a place for all your books. His eyes were full of hope, and his sincere question filled me with a bittersweet feeling. He was so sure that his dreams would come true, and I couldn't help but answer him. I hugged him tightly, stroking his head. Yes, sweetheart, we will have a new house, and everything you want will be yours. He quietly fell asleep, and I remained sitting next to him, feeling my heart filled with a strange, heavy sensation. I knew that, despite all my efforts, I couldn't change the past, nor the behavior of my parents. But at least for Lucas, for his future, I had to do everything I could. Moments like this gave me a sense that I was doing something right. At least for him. And still, despite this inner comfort, the world around me continued to change with astonishing speed. That evening, when I was once again absorbed in plans for the future, my phone suddenly lit up with a message from my mom. I almost dropped my cup of coffee when I read her text. Dear, we haven't seen you and Lucas in a long time. Why don't you come over this weekend? My fingers froze on the screen, as if the message was not for me, but for someone else. It was strange. We hadn't seen them in a long time. In recent years, my relationship with my parents had become so cold, so distant. It seemed that every time I tried to reconnect, I was met only with indifference and inattentiveness. But now, after such changes in my life, promotion at work, a new house, an improvement in our financial situation, they suddenly wanted to see us. Or rather, me. I couldn't understand what lay behind this message. A desire to reconnect? A sincere wish to see their grandson? Or just a manifestation of some order in their eyes, when external successes began to align with what they considered right? My hand froze over the screen. I felt something tighten in my chest. Recalling past visits, I couldn't easily predict what awaited me at my parents' house. Mom always tried to steer the conversation toward what was important to her: outward attributes, status, material achievements. All of that exhausted me. She couldn't understand that I no longer sought their approval. My path was different from the one they had envisioned for me. But in their eyes, it seemed there was only room for recognition of external success, for those eternal, show me to believe, moments. Requests for money were becoming more insistent. A new refrigerator, house repairs, all these became part of my daily existence, part of this new life I was trying to build. But one Sunday, when Lucas was napping upstairs, Dad said, without looking up from his newspaper, as if it were something completely ordinary, "We've been thinking about buying a new car. Of course, the payments will be a bit high, but with your new position, how much did they say the amount was?" He said it with such certainty, as if I should have believed this a long time ago. And although I felt the numbers he named would have made me gasp a year ago, now they sounded completely doable. "We will pay you back," my mother added, her voice confident, almost reassuring, but I knew they wouldn't. I knew this as clearly as I knew that our home would always be filled with too many unsaid words, too many unresolved questions. Still, I agreed. Perhaps it was my way of asserting myself, trying to prove to myself that I wouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past, that now, after everything I had achieved, I could allow myself this small luxury. Maybe I truly wanted to give myself the chance to feel that, despite all the pain, I could change my fate. Or maybe I was seeking approval, from them, from myself. In any case, I began sending them a check every month for the car payment. I kept paying, and as strange as it seemed, I felt a weird sense of relief when I transferred the money. Perhaps it was my compensation for all those years when I had to live in the shadow of others' expectations. Maybe it was a way to regain at least a small part of control. But Jenny, always more measured and wise, once told me over morning coffee, when I complained about the strange weight of these regular payments, "Be careful, Becca, money has a way of complicating things." I nodded, though inside me something stirred uneasily. I knew she was right, but the path had already been chosen. It was hard to give up on what already seemed inevitable. My relationship with my parents, with my mom and dad, had always been based on the fact that I was the one who allowed them to be sure that everything would be fine, that I would manage, that I wouldn't leave. I couldn't stop playing that role. But deep down, I knew that money wasn't the solution. It was just a tool, one that could not only help but also destroy. I couldn't believe my ears when I heard those words. The burden I had been carrying all this time seemed unbearable. "After everything I've done for you." Her voice, filled with irritation, sounded almost unbearable. I began to feel the weight of my own efforts like a stone pressing on my chest. Each word felt like a blow to my own desire to help, like a brand I had placed on myself. She continued, "I've been paying your car loan for the past year. Every time you need money." She interrupted herself with a laugh that pierced deep into my soul. That laugh was like a cold wind, impossible to fight against, as if it had always been directed at me. "Oh, we won't be accepting your handouts anymore," she said. Those words, spoken so casually, struck me to my core. How had everything changed? How many times had I told myself I was doing all this for them, for Lucas, for all of them? But now, it felt as though I was simply something to be used and then discarded, like an unnecessary object. She continued, "Emma's new position comes with a great salary. She's going to help us instead of you." Those words were like a shot that pierced the silence. Emma, my sister, who had never asked how I was feeling, was now going to be the one to take on this burden. I was unnecessary. Everything I had done had been meaningless, and I realized it with painful clarity. The line went dead, and I was left alone with that heavy shadow in my mind. Everything I had built, everything I had tried to give, was destroyed. I lay on the hospital bed, with a heavy head, and everything around me seemed to be in a fog. My eyes, clouded with tears, saw blurry silhouettes, faces of people who had once been mine, but now seemed foreign. Mixed with the sweat on my face, those months of help I had given them, day after day, evening after evening, all those weekends when I tried to be perfect, joyful, happy, so that everyone around me could feel I was bringing them joy and support. But this was what it had come to. When someone better appeared, someone who didn't have to feel guilty about every minute, every gesture, Lucas and I became awkward again. We became uncomfortable for those who had once been close to us. I thought of him and this, lying in the dark room, with the hospital sheet that felt like a wall separating me from the rest of the world. We were again out of place in their lives, too disturbing, too demanding of attention and care. In those moments, I hardly noticed the nurse approaching. She gently touched my hand, her touch so warm and tender that I felt even more alone. "Ms. Mitchell, we really need to prepare you for surgery," she said, and I nodded. I knew I couldn't fight this anymore. Everything I had done had gone unappreciated, and now it didn't matter. My past, my efforts, my ambitions. They were all in the shadows. I couldn't change anything that had happened. Looking at my phone, I dialed Jenny's number. Everything seemed so empty, but I still tried to find support in those who might, at least for a moment, bring me back a sense of normalcy. She answered on the first ring, her voice immediately familiar and warm, like a promise of some kind of rescue. "Jenny," I whispered, barely audible, and my hand tightened around the phone. My voice was no more than a whisper, as if I feared the words I was about to say would be too heavy to be heard. I had tried to buy my parents' love with money and tolerance, but no matter how hard I tried, their hearts remained closed to me. They didn't need my help, they didn't seek my presence. They were content with their familiar rituals, their usual expectations of me as the eldest daughter who was always supposed to be there, always supposed to help. I had built my relationship with them through money, through material things, hoping that somehow this would replace the love and care I so desperately longed for. But a real family picks you up from the hospital. A real family builds blanket forts with your child, shares in your joys and troubles, takes an interest in your life. And at some point, I realized that my life could no longer be the way it was before, that real warmth and real support came not from them, but from the people who had become my true family. 3 months passed, and life finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. Jenny and her parents had become an inseparable part of our lives, and their presence filled our days with light and joy. Every weekend we had barbecues in their garden, lively and noisy gatherings, the laughter of children, the smell of grilled meat filling the air. We spent evenings in the park, riding bikes, playing football, and at night, we had family movie nights, sitting on the couch wrapped in blankets, just like the old days when my sister and I were children. These were moments of simple happiness, when there was no room for worries or painful memories. But then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, when I had almost forgotten what anxiety felt like, my phone rang. Mom's number flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a few seconds, unable to bring myself to answer. My heart fluttered, and I felt my hand hover over the decline button. Why? Why should I re-enter this cycle, listen to her sweet, manipulative voice again? But despite all my attempts to avoid her, I answered. "Hello, darling," her voice came through, with that sugary tone she always used when she wanted something. I could almost see her smile, her way of speaking when she tried to create the illusion of care, as if she were the kindest mother in the world. That voice always made me feel small, helpless, as though I were still that little girl who needed to please. "How are you, darling? What do you want, Mom?" I tried to say it as if I didn't care, but inside, something tightened, and I felt my fingers nervously press the screen. "Oh, well," she sighed theatrically, "since you're asking, your dad got into a bit of a situation with the car payment." I felt laughter bubbling up inside me. How could she start with this again? Money, as always. It was like a scratched record, endlessly repeating the same lines. I held back the laughter, but there was a lump in my throat. How many years had I tolerated this? How many times had I tried to prove to them that I was more than just their daughter, more than the one who was always expected to pay something, always expected to help, always supposed to be at the center of their lives, yet remain invisible when their gaze passed over me? "Oh, you see," she continued, unaware that I had essentially stopped listening, lost in my own thoughts. The calls started coming in waves. First from Mom's phone, then Dad's, when I didn't answer their voice messages. With each new message, I felt my heart tighten. From tearful pleas to angry demands, it all sounded so familiar, so merciless. It was as if I were becoming that weak daughter again, the one who had to obey, who had to help, even when it was destroying her. Each new message was a reminder of how much I had given, how many times I had tried, yet received nothing in return. "Becca, please, we're your parents. It's so selfish of you, we're going to lose the car because of you." Their words carried no acknowledgement of my pain, no sincere regret for what I had gone through. All they cared about was their car, their money, their feelings. They demanded that I once again be their support, but not one of them mentioned Lucas. No one said a word about how they had ignored us, how I had felt invisible to them all this time, as if my life and feelings didn't matter. It was all about them, their needs, their feelings. And then, each subsequent message only confirmed that I had made the right choice. After a week of this emotional terror, I realized I couldn't take it anymore. I blocked their numbers, reclaiming my right to silence. I set up email filters to send their messages straight to the trash. No calls, no letters. I finally felt the heavy burden lift from my shoulders. I could breathe. The freedom I had long sought had finally come. At that moment, amid all this cleansing, I felt as though I began to truly see what mattered to me. Jenny, who had always been there, along with her family, had become my real sanctuary. Their warmth filled the emptiness my parents had left behind. One quiet Sunday afternoon, as Jenny and I sat on her patio watching Lucas and Max chase each other around her backyard, she asked me a question that seemed to hang in the air. "Do you know who I really am?" she asked, her voice soft yet confident. We were sitting at the table, where Tom, as always, stood by the grill, and Sarah was setting the table for our weekly family dinner. It was that moment when everything in my life seemed to stop, and I focused solely on this question. A question not about family or relationships, but about me, my understanding of who I was and how I saw others. I paused for a moment, watching Lucas laugh as he played with Max. These children were like one whole to me. None of them felt like outsiders. None of them were in the background. In their play, in their unfiltered joy, there was everything I had been searching for in my life. My answer to Jenny's question wasn't quick. It wasn't just a yes or no. It was something deeper than mere words. "You are my truest friend," I said, as though I had finally understood what truly mattered. Jenny smiled, and in her gaze was so much warmth and acceptance that I felt I was finally closing the door on my past. I no longer tried to be the one who pleases and hopes for something in return. I no longer sought approval. I no longer did anything to earn love that wasn't genuine. In that moment, I realized that true family isn't the one that demands and manipulates, but the one that knows how to be there, that supports, that doesn't place conditions on love. Jenny and her family had become the ones who filled my life with meaning. And perhaps it was through them that I began to realize I could be myself, without excuses and without the fear of being misunderstood.